Happy or sad?
Sad.
Okay. But I warn you, I'll break your heart.
Already broken.
This is one of my favorite scenes from the entire series of Peaky Blinders. Grace offers to sing for a troubled Thomas Shelby, and Tommy decides to humor her because, well, he's at the end of his rope. A disheveled shell looking for any ounce of escapism. There's nothing too dramatic going on here, nothing too animated. That's exactly why I like it so much. There's a subtle roller coaster of emotions that happens all within a few brief seconds. Pay attention to the tremble in his voice and the defeated look drawn across his face.
Already broken.
Cillian Murphy is in tune with his emotions enough to have complete control over his own range. Now, there's this idea that acting should be animated, that true acting is how hard you can cry on cue or how much anger you're able to bring out without it seeming cringe or forced. We see it in a number of Hollywood A-listers, their ability to tune up the drama while making it believable. But acting isn't so surface level. Anyone who's ever been on stage or in a scene knows that being conscious of what you're doing will almost certainly kill the momentum of a performance. There's a fine line between powerful and comical. Nearly everything is done off of instinct. If you aren't actively feeling the emotions, it's hard to see anything but a forced performance.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
When you're the viewer, being a critic is half of the fun. You get to point fingers at faults and play expert from the comfort of your own home. But Cillian Murphy's performance makes it hard to properly critique. Most of us don't know enough about acting to give in-depth analysis into what went wrong or what he could have done and when. Given the scale of his talent and the subtlety that's warranted from the role itself, the most we can do is admire. Cillian Murphy is no stranger to subtlety. In fact, a number of his roles consist of either a reserved villain or a troubled protagonist, becoming a recurring favorite for directors like Christopher Nolan. He's been tested before. Cillian has a habit of acting with his eyes, which certainly works to his benefit. This isn't a new tactic in cinema. We see it a lot from actors like Anthony Hopkins or Daniel Day-Lewis. They're constantly maneuvering around the room, surveying the area and any potential threats. He uses cigarettes to create breaks in dialogue, suggesting Thomas is conflicted in his decision making if only for a moment. Cillian refuses to perform anything in an on-the-nose fashion. You rarely see Thomas Shelby break or lash out, and when he does, he's almost immediately reined back, either by himself or those around him.
So shoot her and bring him to me.
Tommy, Mrs. Changretta was a teacher at our school.
She's a good woman, Tom. Good woman.
Thomas is in a constant attempt to remain composed throughout the entire series, with the exception of a few scenes here and there. He's the pillar of the Shelby name, but at a great personal cost. Thomas Shelby is a deeply conflicted individual.
Men like us, Mr. Shelby, will always be alone. And what love we get, we will have to pay for.
You forget, Inspector. I have my family.
He's desperately trying to go legitimate and solidify the Shelby name. He deals with a family seemingly hellbent on sabotaging his progress. Arthur is loud and boisterous, often letting his anger dictate his direction in life, creating conflict that otherwise would have been resolved in a more reasonable way. John is naive and shares Arthur's temper, though it's slightly more controlled. Polly is cunning and obstructing, and Ada needs to be constantly supervised given her runaway nature. Tommy knows he's not exactly surrounded by the most capable of crews. He knows that the best way to juggle an ill-tempered family is to lead by example. Therefore, he's reserved, stern when he needs to be, but he rarely ever lets this facade slip because he's aware that if he's not at the helm, if he isn't spearheading the charge into legitimacy, the entire house of cards will come crashing down. Compare this with Tom Hardy's character Alfie Solomons, whose cocky and arrogant nature make him a prime antagonist.
Good morning, Mr. Solomons.
Yeah, it is.
His character is far less subtle, and he doesn't need to be. Alfie knows that Thomas Shelby is playing with far more chips on the table than he is. As far as we know, Alfie has no moral obligations, no family ties holding him back, no need for emotional suppression. Like Tommy, he's been deep in the trenches of warfare. Anything afterwards is simply a bonus. This lack of attachment and moral obligation makes Alfie the perfect counter to Thomas Shelby. Now, unlike Alfie, Tommy doesn't have a choice but to be emotionally suppressed. He's been to war and deals with a tremendous amount of PTSD, which rears its ugly head often throughout the series. Despite this, Tommy has to be a mediator for conflict.
Kimber and me fought this battle one-on-one. It's over. Go home to your families.
His best defense is his self-control. During sit-downs, he's often the one taming a rattled Arthur or John, handling negotiations with the resolve necessary for finding a solution. He's the only reason the Shelbys have made it this far, and often the reason they run into trouble. Despite his willingness to collaborate, a number of the people he's met and relationships he's attempted to nurture have almost always turned sour. Tommy's aspirations are a detriment to his own business.
You want a simple life?
Do I look like a man who wants a simple life, eh?
His sense of urgency and lust for power have been the driving force behind most of the conflict in the show, though you wouldn't notice it from the way he carries himself. Tommy's intentions are never truly revealed until the end of the conflict, and blame is easily placed on whatever family member is seemingly behind the commotion for the episode. It's an easy scapegoat if you don't stop to look behind the curtain. No matter the conflict or situation the Shelbys find themselves in, Tommy is almost always pulling the strings, a standard necessary for maintaining an iron grip on the gang's leadership. Cillian's ability to portray this and give the audience just enough visible emotion is quite the difficult thing to pull off. A similar and critically acclaimed performance is that of Al Pacino's Michael Corleone. Michael has the same standard of behavior as Thomas Shelby. He has a family he needs to look after, he has relationships he needs to nurture while also dealing with post-war and personal traumatic stress. He's lost the love of his life and has to settle for a previous partner. The business he's in doesn't allow for him to be vulnerable or show any ounce of transparency. He doesn't want anyone to get a read on him or what he's thinking, and understandably so. His subordinates aren't the brightest, and there's almost no one within the crew he can fully trust. His family is seemingly the root cause of most of the conflict, though he almost always has a hand in it. There are a number of parallels here. The tale of the conflicted Don isn't new in cinema or television. Characters like Tony Soprano lead through intimidation. As Uncle Junior says, he's never had the makings of a varsity athlete. Whatever he can't negotiate, he strong arms by instilling fear into whoever he's pushing to do his bidding. Thomas Shelby is wise enough to, for the most part, not resort to immediate threats. He knows that fear is a powerful thing, but wherever there's an alternative, he'll take it. Tommy sees anger as a sign of weakness. Arthur's temper has created visible lapses in his judgment. Tommy's well aware that this method of ruling leaves flaws in your security. An angry man's words are almost never calculated.
I just killed 2 of them. Ripped out their hearts and burnt their barns to ash.
You're just provoking the situation due to a mishandling of emotions. Cillian does not get nearly enough credit for this portrayal. Peaky Blinders, while critically acclaimed, isn't exactly Game of Thrones level trendy. The cinematography is gorgeous, the actors are top notch, but sometimes you get dealt a hand that isn't exactly ideal. Nonetheless, the show has made it to 6 full seasons and generated somewhat of a cult following. Cillian's performance is nothing short of extraordinary. His characters aren't as animated or in your face as, say, Robert Downey Jr. or Tom Hardy, and his interviews are more reminiscent of the timid and quiet Daniel Day-Lewis, but fortunately for us, he's solidified his place in Hollywood. Thanks to Thomas Shelby, I'd wager the world is now fully aware of the talent that is Cillian Murphy.